Welcome to The Trace. It's been a little bit, but I'm Andrew Hackett, and I'm happy to be with you, my friends, today. And I immediately hand the mic to dear friend, life companion, disruptor, healer, Josh Horvath. You're here. Why are you here? And why are you taking over?
I'm here to interview you because we are releasing a print of your first short story collection titled Sayulita Stories.
Yes, Sayulita Stories. I'm holding the physical copy, the second test printing, the one that is officially going out and printing in the next few days.
Yep.
Coming
And
out on October 13th, we are doing an event, a party that's free and everybody's invited at, if you're in Seattle, in Ballard, the bar, Hazelwood, a beloved and sacred space for me personally. We're going to have a book launch party, and copies will be $20. You can also order this online if you'd like to. You can email me at willthefire@gmail.com. And but anyways, everybody's invited. It's going to start at 7 o'clock. Pop on in Hazelwood, Thursday, October 13th, 7 o'clock on. And yeah, Sayulita Stories. I'm very happy to hold this in my hands. And look, and Josh did this beautiful artwork, and Casey helped. Our friend Casey helped with the lettering and everything, and it's a beautiful thing. All right, go ahead.
I was going to say that they're printing them probably right now.
Okay.
It's the Seattle Printworks emailed me
Sayulita
this morning. It was like,
Seattle Printworks, awesome place, I gotta say.
very nice.
Yeah, we did this. We didn't do the easy way. We put in all the work to put this out, and it's all handmade and local and everything. And yeah, it's 5 short stories that take place mostly in the 90s, although there's basically a current day one, the one that's called Sayulita.
I just want to just rep Left of Age, which
Do
is
it.
an art collective. Of course, Andrew, we've kind of done most things somehow connected for a long time. So I'm happy that the first real thing we're doing is his thing. We have Dinu Lipati here. So part of Left of Age in a way I'm not even get into, but
Josh and
hopefully,
I,
and maybe by the time this is released, the website should be done, leftofage.com, which you could order the book, get it
yep,
shipped to you from there as well.
yep, yeah. Josh and I have been in multiple bands. Casa,
Mm-hmm.
Into the Sea, which should have its own book. Uh,
Yeah.
the rise and fall of Into the Sea.
Yeah, interesting. Into the Sea is connected to Sayulita Stories actually in some
Absolutely,
way.
of
So
course it is.
sure.
And and the first band that I was ever in, well, I was in a fake band in high school called the Walkens, which was a band devoted to Christopher Walken. And I think we practiced one time, but we made band shirts, and each member, we each had a different Christopher Walken shirt with a different quote on it. And the Walkens, I still love that guy, Mr. Christopher Walken, but that's obvious.
Fantastic band name, I would say. Okay, why don't we just get into it? Let's start with some questions. So, random questions at that. Oh, very simple one. When someone reads this book, do you have any musical recommendations? Any
Yes.
soundtracks?
So there's two ways to look at this. One, if you read with like I normally when I read, I have instrumental music on. So if you're doing instrumental music, obviously Unwed Sailor, uh, Mogwai, those are the two main ones. Oh yeah, Brian Eno, Daniel Lanois, Apollo, that one. So those would be the main ones that I recommend. And if you're listening, if you listen to music with words while you're reading, because some people can do that, some can't. Roadside Monument, Seattle band, Starflyer 59, any of the first 4 or 5 albums, they're actually referenced in 2 of the stories.
let's pick it to like if we broke it down into maybe a few of the short stories for like NYC Y2K. What would that
Well,
sound?
Blonde on Blonde, Bob Dylan, or Leonard Cohen, the first one, Songs of Leonard Cohen or whatever it's called, the first record.
Okay.
Or actually his album various what's that called? Various Positions, which is the album with Hallelujah, but that's not why. In fact, I always that's a great song, obviously, but
I like that for that book. I
I
would
can't
not have
ever.
thought of those music recommendations, but
Yeah,
that's like it kind of puts it in better perspective actually.
yeah, and I
Like,
can't ever listen to Hallelujah again. Well, I get only his version. I don't want to hear any other versions of that song. But that there's a few mood songs on that, especially the song Night Comes On. And good Lord, that is the vibe of NYC Y2K, 100%.
cue
And
the
then,
music, but we're not going to.
yeah. Oh, actually, unless I
I
edit some
guess you
in.
could.
Um, and then let's see. Then high school striptease would be, yeah, Starflyer 59, the first album, Silver, this album, or Gold, either of the first two, because it's a little dark, a little melancholy, but moody. The Bright Light of the Christian Bookstore. Well, the main character in that story loves like hair metal or like, but he loves Christian hard rock from the 80s, which is terrible. So I don't want to subject anyone to that because you should listen to Petra if you read that story.
Is that really what it would be though? You think?
Well, that's what
There's
he
a
listens
soundtrack?
to. Uh, the vibe for that story, I guess it would be something that the teenage. Well, wait a second. I can't. I was almost at a spoiler. There's another character in the story that's cooler, and that character would listen to. Well, it's set in the '90s, but I feel like that character would listen to like Bright Eyes, Lifted, or the Rilo Kiley album that was on Saddle Creek. I can't remember the name of that. The Execution of All Things. That character would listen to that. And Sayulita,
Yeah. I was like, what would that? That's an
Bob
interesting one.
Dylan's in that one too, but it's a beach story and it's Sayulita, so it should probably be some kind of reggae or something. It's a very reggae place, Sayulita.
There's an evil kind of
Mm.
quote unquote evil retreat center mentioned. I wonder
Yeah.
what they'd be
Maybe some.
playing in that place.
Oh God. Oh, it'd be like winds and chimes, that kind of shit.
Wind
But
chime.
also Sayulita would be fun to listen to like straight up black metal or something. I don't know. That's an
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like that liturgy album.
Mm. Yeah, they
What,
have that song.
what's generator, whatever that,
Generation.
or that Deaf Heaven, the pink one,
Yeah.
Sunbather. That would be
Mhm.
good for that one. And for black metal purists, I know that those aren't, that's what they were calling transcendent black metal. That was a little movement that came and went pretty quick. It seems like good albums though. And then the first story is erotic thriller and the tumbleweed. Oh well, that story. All of them have explicit music references. Every single one of them. So obviously, music is very important to me. They and the characters in that love Weezer. They love. It's set in '94, and it's the Blue album. That's what they love. I don't think that music really fits this feeling of the story though.
Yeah.
But that's what they like.
Just like 107.7 the end.
Yeah.
In
Yeah,
94.
120 minutes in 1994.
Yeah.
Whatever's on,
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Oh, the experience of friendship is felt in many of these stories. What did friendship mean to some of these characters? I feel like it's a kind of a central theme.
It's an appropriate question, considering that you are asking it, my dear friend. Friendship is one of the core aspects of these stories. Absolutely. A theme in these stories is the question of identity. How do you get it? Is identity, even if you get an identity, is it permanent? Other people and your culture and your family, your society are going to try to identify you against your will without your agency. That's what childhood is about, by the way. Childhood is people telling you who you are, right? And adolescence, which a lot of these stories are about, is about you starting to say who you are. And to me, friendship is key to understanding the self. It's through the other, and it's through somebody seeing you and seeing what makes you unique and affirming you. And what's more beautiful than that?
Yeah. Seeing yourself in another person too.
Finding yourself
Like
in the other.
together, finding
Yeah.
yourself together. Which if we think, yeah, if we probably shouldn't talk about ourselves too much, but man, if it would definitely be a definition of our friendship would be
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of.
And if you don't, the worst thing, that can happen to you is to not have a friend. And
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
well,
that could be a quote in the back of this book almost.
Yeah. And there's a line in erotic thriller The Tumbleweed, the worst thing that can happen to you is to hide and never be found, which could be the same thing as not having a friend.
Total metaphor.
And the movie that means the most to me, well, one of the movies that means the most to me, that's a core movie in my life, is Taxi Driver. And Taxi Driver is certainly about a person who doesn't have a friend, and how horrible that is, and how it leads to horrible things in the world. Everybody needs a friend. What does Tom Petty say? It's hard to find a friend, which Peter Lion named one of their albums that.
Hard to find a friend.
I got to talk to Dave Bazan at the Roadside Monument show last month here in Seattle. And just shout out to Roadside Monument, who has just played Furnace Fest. I had the great pleasure of interviewing all three of them on the Trace podcast. And they are a huge influence on my life, their music. And for this book to come out at the same time that they got together for the first time in quite a while, and I got to be there and see people like Jeff Betker, Jeff Suffering, Jeremy Enoch, and Dave Bazan, and a bunch of my dear beloved friends. It's very special. So yeah, I just want to shout out Roadside Monument.
I remember talking to you after you went to that show and noting how that show and then this short story collection, it just feels like a zeitgeist moment of kind of
I hope that
who thought you would be watching Roadside Monument 2022. I mean, it's like not really
I know the first time I saw him, I think I was 1997, and it was shatter. It was a shattering experience in the best possible way. Yeah. And I hope that they all read the book. I would hope they read it. The Roadside guys. Shout out.
I would say it was seeing them was probably like, like someone seeing Fugazi or something in the time. It was just I have a vivid memory of actually at the Redmond Firehouse, and with a good friend I played music with. The Promise Ring, I think, was like the headliner or something. Yeah, It was cool.
The two bands from that period that I listened to the most and that continue to resonate, Roadside Monument and Zayo, from that whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So I was listening to Zayo on my drive over to where I'm recording this right now.
Yeah.
So Christianity, I think, is presented in a few of these stories in a unique way.
What?
And
what?
Well, it's brought up.
Yeah. Just kidding. Go ahead.
It's in one of the titles, Bright Light, the Christian Bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity has become so strange in America. It's like it's sad, is what it is. But I feel in these stories, and it's brought up in a unique way, and a genuine way, I would say. So, what role does Christianity play in like some of these characters, if at all?
Well, one thing. So, like, I'll preface it by saying that I don't believe that evangelical Christianity is redeemable. I believe that it has to be scrapped 100%. And it's become just like a horror, literal horror that's turned to literally advocating for violence against leftists in America. And it's absurd and ridiculous and uncanny. These stories are set in the 90s, most of them. And so whenever Christianity comes up, specifically in three of them, like three, two of them, two or three. And one of the stories, Sayulita, literally has nothing about religion. But in the Christianity in the 90s in America was different than it is now. It still was loaded with problems, to be clear, loaded. But there was room for weirdos, and you could be a leftist and still be in it. Like it wouldn't have been a big deal in most churches back then. It wasn't assumed for sure that you were a Republican, and you could be into like hardcore punk rock, weird stuff. There was even a mirroring at the time between straight edge culture, which was originally had no connection at all to Christianity, with Minor Threat and then Fugat, like in the 80s. By the 90s, those cultures had kind of mixed in with this indie, all ages Christian indie hardcore scene, which I was a part of, and you were as well. Anyways, I've seen since then people react in all these different ways to people to growing up growing up a Christian in the 80s and 90s in the United States. Some people, there's a whole movement called evangelicals that are people that were formerly evangelical that now have a different relationship to it. And some of those people are still Christian to some degree, but not evangelical. Some of those people are atheist and everything in between. But there's a relation, and a lot of that community is connected to the queer community. And I'm, somewhat connected to this community of people. And a lot of these stories deal with that stuff because, I've dealt with that, what people call deconstruction, deconstructing your identity, your the way you see the world, yourself, everything, because religion tries to tell you who you are. Certainly, often it does, especially if it's conservative, because religion isn't necessarily conservative. It's just often that way. So anyways, these stories, whenever a religion does come up, I hope that people won't see it as limiting in the stories, because these are stories about opening up possibilities of identity.
Yeah, when I'm saying you present it in a unique way is that I feel you present it in somewhat of an ambiguous.
Yes.
Not loaded. It just kind of it's just like
it's a part of their lives.
Part of their lives, and it's not, meaning like you're not promoting or
no.
You make up a word, de-promoting it at all. So that's why I think it's interesting.
There are things about it in the stories that are good and bad. And we're not talking about white supremacy, white nationalist Christianity that now has become the norm. That was not the case at the time. That was fringe. And so it wasn't as toxic. It was still toxic, but it wasn't as toxic. And like, for example, in The Bright Light of the Christian Bookstore, it's about a guy in his 30s who manages a nerd, like a sci-fi nerd guy who loves hair metal, who manages a Christian bookstore in the mid-90s. And that character, for me, in a lot of ways, is Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. He's someone like that. He's somebody that doesn't have a place to be.
It's funny you said that, because when you were talking about Taxi Driver a little bit ago, I was wondering, like, is there a Travis Bickle character? So that's interesting.
Yeah,
that you said that.
Travis,
I was going to ask you that question. So.
Travis and Terry Terry is, when I see Taxi Driver, I've seen it many, many, many times. I showed it to my 15-year-old this summer. We had a powerful experience talking about it. To me, Taxi Driver is absolutely a compassionate film. It's also a tragic film. It's about the failure of society, the failure of us of taking care of each other. Like that's what society is supposed to do. Why do we have a society if we don't take care of each other? This is the absurdity of like right-wing politics. If we have a society just so we can do survival of the fittest competition with each other, then I'd rather not have a society at all. It's ridiculous. We're supposed to be together to help each other. And sometimes churches can do that for people, regardless of theology. And that is what the bright light of the Christian bookstore, that's what I found really interesting about this guy, Terry. The reason why he starts to go to church is because his friend invites him to a Petra concert, which is a really goofy 80s Christian hard rock, I don't know what you know, band that I heard when I was a kid. And I even when I was a kid, I thought they were goofy, you know, compared to the stuff that was on MTV or whatever. And because people are nice to him and because he likes the music, he, quote, becomes a Christian. But he's not theological.
Yeah.
He's not, it's not like he's just found a place where people are nice to him and he likes the music. That's it. Because everywhere else, people have been horrible to him, especially school.
Yeah.
He's been bullied his whole, life. And so his first comfort is science fiction films, specifically Star Wars and Star Trek.
And just found a Comic-Con.
That's that nowadays Terry would not go to a church. You're right. That's right. Yeah. So I hope that like the bright light of the Christian bookstore and Christianity or religion, what I hope with a story like that is for somebody to be like, well, this is such a weird world. It's like, but it was real. And it's not a true story, but the conditions, the setting is very real and places that I've been. And so I hope that people
it's not exaggerated.
It's not exaggerated at all. I would hope that instead of people feeling like, because people are afraid to talk about religion and everything, and I would hope that it feels more like an open door to just like thinking and wondering and imagining, and not like limiting for the reader.
I'm picking my questions at random. I've written them out, but then I'm just like, so I'm happy that I picked this question out of the pile, and it's a nice flow. So we're keeping in the flow here. So it's kind of a two-part question. One, what creates loneliness in an individual, and how is loneliness experienced in some of these characters? How are they experiencing loneliness?
We are back to friendship. You're lonely when you don't have friendship. And so I'm going to use a term that I know that some people that I've been called, I've heard this called out as possibly ableist language. So I'm just saying that ahead of time. I don't know of a way of saying it better, but I mean this obviously symbolically, not literally. Friendship is being seen and heard, and within that being affirmed. That's what it is. And so to not be seen and heard, figuratively, is to be lonely. That's why you can be there's a quote in The Thin Red Line where the Jim Caviezel character asks the Sean Penn character, do you ever get lonely? And Sean Penn says, only around people. Because being lonely, probably the most lonely I've ever been is in groups where I feel like I can't be myself, which I experienced in church quite often, right? When I was younger. And but just as much like in any kind of like preppy or yuppie or bougie kind of environment, also, I feel like I can't be myself. I have to be too careful about what I say and everything. So loneliness is to not be yourself, loneliness is to not to be able to be yourself. Because the assumption is like, you can only really be yourself if you feel like you're being affirmed. If you feel like you're going to be criticized all the time, you're probably not going to do that. So, and loneliness is a huge part of these stories. And the characters are all different in it. Some of them are avoiding solitude and loneliness, like the questions that can come. Because to me, that's solitude and loneliness are basically have nothing to do with each other. To me, solitude is like affirming the self in the self with the self.
It's interesting because so many people are scared to be alone. Like it's their worst nightmare. It's the thing they avoid. Even if they are alone, they're filling their mind with some input.
Yeah.
And yet Sean Penn's like, what is it? I can't remember the quote. Like, I'm alone.
Do you ever get lonely?
Yeah.
Only around people.
So, but in solitude, you have the chance to experience like the least lonely experience.
It can
because
happen.
You're not around people that are going to bring out that sense of being different or not seen or heard. So it's kind of this strange paradox. And I would say, actually, if you can be in solitude, then you probably won't feel lonely when you're around other people because you've discovered something of worth in yourself. So, and when you're young, this is like kind of the task of a young person in a way, perhaps. And there's a lot of young people in these stories. So,
yep. I fear people that can't be alone. That's the kind of person I fear. I fear most people that are cruel, and then people that are willfully ignorant, and then people that cannot be alone.
And people who are cruel are. It's almost like this poor way of trying to make connection with someone, but you're doing it in this horribly negative way. You know, to be seen, like if you hurt someone, like they're gonna see you, they're gonna react to you. If you hurt someone, it's like, oh, I am real. Like somebody reacted, even though it's this negative way. Yeah. How does trauma impact these characters, positively or negatively?
So this is where I would differentiate between, because trauma is a part of this, but even more is something called the event. And I'm actually reading a book right now on Jacques Derrida, postmodern philosopher, who writes extensively about the event, along with a lot of other people. But the event has become a very, very important idea to me. The event is when something happens that could not be predicted, that could not be, and that you can't make happen. So it's something that's out of your hands. It's something that happens to you, and again, you can't predict it. It's the incoming of the impossible. It's this, and so the event could be anything from falling in love, having a child, which is one of the only ways that you can actually make the event happen. But there's something obviously still, very mysterious and miraculous even about a birth, of course. But the event could be the loss of a loved one. The event could be spiritual. People who have ecstatic, transformative, religious or spiritual experiences, and we'll talk about them as like a before and after in their lives. That's the event. So the event can happen any day. Like every morning that you wake up, the event is possible. So I'm using that word instead of trauma because it's similar to trauma, except when we talk about trauma, I think we always assume it's something negative, right? But the event could be
in and of itself is an event.
It is. It's true.
Like, oh, I'm still here.
Still here. And so there's another word that's kind of like this, which is that Hannah Arendt uses, which is called natality. And natality is kind of similar to the event. It means that something's possible and something good is possible, something unpredictable. And I'm all about the event. I'm very interested in the event. And most great movies and stories, if you don't have an event, it's probably a little bit boring. I mean, normally we tell stories for some kind of remarkable reason. There are filmmakers and authors that can write stories without the event, and those can be really fun. Like Jim Jarmusch kind of does that with his movies, but I would say it's almost like he finds the event in these little things that wouldn't seem like so dramatic. That's beautiful. That is beautiful.
That's true wisdom for me.
He's one of my absolute idols, like absolute heroes.
That's what I'm saying. Just waking up,
yeah,
every morning is an event in a real sense.
So, but these stories certainly are about, normal people, basically, and something happens, something breaks in.
Yeah.
Is it good or bad? You'll find out when you read the stories.
This site is a good segue, again, picking these questions at random. And I'm asking this question maybe from a little bit of a technical place, which is, what factors create change in a character? Is there a method? Is there a formula? I mean, the event and all this stuff is we're kind of in that realm right now, but
Well, I guess I would say, I mean, first of all, the conditions of a character's life. Clearly, that's your family, your friends, your society, your biology, like your body. And then what creates change? I think it's
it's like I'm asking this because it is a theme in these stories, not like explicit or there's like some Mother Goose.
It's when something happens that makes you realize
what it is. Yeah, these stories are changes happening, I would say.
It's when something happens, big or small, that makes you realize that more is possible or less than you thought before. When it's an opening up of possibility in the world. But it's part of it is fear about the bad things that could happen. And fear is not irrational, by the way. Like people, we call anxiety like a bad mental health or like a mental health problem. What's truly astounding is that we aren't racked with anxiety every moment of our lives, because there's always bad possibilities. And I don't mean this in a pessimistic way. It's like our brains trick us into thinking that we're okay and we're safe. We're not at all. This world is not safe.
So change, you could say, is maybe facing fear or recognizing a fear or something. I don't know. I do think whatever we're most scared of is probably what we need to go towards.
The way out is through. That kind of idea, for sure.
Or just because fear is what limits possibility, right? If you're saying like possibility is a part of change, or like experiencing more possibility, but fear is what keeps us from experiencing different possibilities.
I wouldn't say that, because I mean, maybe, but fear is also appropriate. Often there are things that we should be afraid of, really. And like when I was young, I was afraid of aggressive men. I still am, but I was really afraid of aggressive men when I was young. And this caused me to avoid a lot of bad things, because I knew who to stay away from. And it led me to my male friends, because I've always generally gotten along better with women than men, whatever, generally. Generalizing, obviously, I don't even believe in male, female. I'm not a gender essentialist. I totally believe in the spectrum of gender and sexuality, 100%. Totally queer thinking, 100%. But whatever, what we generally call male, female in society. I stayed away from dangerous men, and fear helped me and drew me to people that were, gentle and not going to hurt me, not going to cause me harm. And so that was a good thing. So
yeah, I'm not saying fear, you don't respect fear, because I agree with what you said, that there's limitations, and accepting those limitations can be healthy for us.
If fear goes too far, if you're afraid of the wrong things, that's the problem. It's about knowing what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of.
I've never really thought about this before in this way. So change happens when we learn what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of, perhaps. Either realizing what we're afraid of, we don't need to be afraid of, or what we are afraid of is trying to help us, is trying to...
Or something that we're not afraid of, dangerous, realize that we should be afraid of. Like, you should be afraid of a lion, but you should not be afraid of a cat, unless you're allergic. Even that'd be something that you learn. Oh, I'm allergic to cats. Okay, right? Like, so fear is a fear and anger, right? I don't, they're, to me, they're not negative emotions. They're
Maybe
emotions that you need to be smart about.
the now as we're kind of dissecting this, it's I should have maybe just said anxiety.
Mm.
That it's not what, like, because right, there's these natural things we need to be afraid of, but anxiety is something else.
Well, but also one more thing about fear, like being naive to toxic people. Like if like going back to religion, people that are naive about, oh, that pastor would never,
Mm-hmm.
touch that boy or girl, or like we found out that within evangelical culture over the last 30 years, there's been all this cover up of sexual abuse and assault by pastors. Pastors are trusted generally by churchgoers, and you should never assume trust. It's like you want to be open to people, but you got to be smart. That's one thing I'm very grateful to my parents about. They were always really, they kept me, they knew how to look out for the scammers and the schemers. And it's one of the reasons why I don't have religious trauma from when I was young, really. And it's because I was around safe, cool, thoughtful, kind people. And I never had anybody try and much love and to everyone who, because I know plenty of people who experienced some form of sexual abuse or assault as kids. And I have so much compassion and for people who have gone through that, and much love to you if you have. And yeah, we have to be smart and open at the same time, which is not, that's tricky.
Yeah, I think it's
Trust has
life.
got
I
to
mean,
be
it's
earned
kind of
though.
life
I
in
don't
some sense.
care. I could care less when I meet a person. It doesn't matter to me if it's the president, the Pope, Bob Dylan, uh, you name it. I mean, anybody. Like, it doesn't matter to me what degree you have. It doesn't matter to me what job you have. Like, I don't care. You got to earn my trust, period, and admiration. Respect and dignity, that's universal for all. All people deserve the chance, you know, to be trusted, but you got to earn it to actually get it.
So with fear, maybe this feeling is almost, I don't know, the strangest experience of fear or intense. In these stories, does the shame play a role in any of these stories?
Oh, yes. Yes, it does. Shame. I remember the first time that I heard, I don't know if this is technically accurate, but I heard the difference between guilt and shame is that guilt is feeling bad about something you've done, and shame is feeling bad about who you are. And good Lord, when I heard that, did that hit me hard. I was probably like 23 or something. And yeah, it was awesome. Because
It was awesome.
immediately, it was awesome to learn this
The
difference
difference. Okay.
because I remember I was at it was at like a conference thing that was just about shame. And they had this paper that had all these sayings. I am lazy. I am stupid. I'm not worthy of love. Like it had this whole list of these. And they handed us, and you're supposed to like circle or whatever, check off any of the ones that you have told yourself, that voice in your head that criticizes yourself. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that means you're a narcissist. um, and I remember a few of them hitting me directly. I am lazy, which is so funny because I definitely don't think that about myself anymore. Um, but I used to think that, and which well, and
Mm-hmm.
then I didn't check off I'm not worthy of love. I'd never heard that voice before.
Mm,
I never felt that because
I have.
most people have, I'm sure. um, I didn't really, I am stupid. Not really. I didn't really, I guess I had kind of heard that a little bit, but there was a few that really, and so with these characters, I mean, to me, adolescence is a time certainly where shame is, well, it was present for me. I assume it is for a lot of people, in a way that it's not now. I still, of course, I still have some shame. There's still things about myself that I think are basically fundamentally wrong. That So I don't know if you can ever completely get rid of shame, but you can certainly minimize it. There's things you can do to affirm yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so these characters in the stories are, some of them are more conscious of it than others. I would say in the story, the first story in the erotic thriller in the Tumbleweed, definitely there's some of that happening as a 14-year-old is trying to figure out who they are. And another thing about childhood is you don't have agency. You don't get to choose many things. You have to do what your parents or whoever your parental figures are. You have to do what they tell you, and if you move, there's nothing you can do about it. And there's something that can cause a lot of rage and anger when what do you feel when you don't have agency? You feel anger, and that's a part of childhood. And then things happen, and you blame yourself for them, things that aren't your fault at all. And I had an experience as a teenager that something that was completely out of my hands that I blamed myself for. And again, if you're listening and you don't know what I'm talking about, I'd be like, you better see a therapist immediately. Because if you're not aware of shame and in your experience, then that's extremely alarming, I would say. So
Is looping, kind of threading some of this conversation and talking about Christianity and the role it plays on the characters. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about, there's verses in the Bible that, like you're a sinner, or you're born like evil or something. I'm not saying it's like explicitly in the Bible, but it's definitely a message that I've heard in
churches say it. I don't believe it is in the Bible, but yes, it's a part of.
But it's something that a lot of churches have latched onto, this idea, and so pretty much saying, it's reinforcing shame, like saying, like, even like the moment you arrive here, like, you're a sinner, and then it provides the answer to that, which to get rid of the shame.
The answer: Jesus suffered and died because you're so awful, but Jesus loves you, so it's okay. That's not helpful at all. It does not address shame in any way whatsoever. That does not address shame.
And also, like, kind of a strange way to relate to God, I would say. Like, this person who died, like, it's
well, here I have an explicit thought about this, and that is sadism and masochism. I'm not talking about S&M. I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about sadistic and masochistic tendencies that we have. In S&M, there are boundaries established. There's communication. There are safe words. There is a whole working out. It's of proper boundaries and proper respect. This is a joke that I have. If we all did S&M, we would all be better as human beings, because we would know more about communications, boundaries, desires, right? Expectations, because you have to be explicit in your language, and you have to think about what you want and what we don't want. Well, we should be doing this in every aspect of our lives. And to me, what in churches that tell you that you're bad and you're a sinner, but Jesus was tortured and crucified because you're so bad and Jesus loves you, therefore don't feel bad about yourself, that doesn't work. That is a sadomasochistic relationship that is, but without any good boundaries or communications, or like, there was a church here in Seattle that I will not justify by naming, that I never went, that I went there like once or twice just because friends were playing music there or things like that, but I never attended because I saw immediately that this was an unbelievably toxic, horrific space from the very beginning. Anyways, in this kind of place, the pastor tells you over and over again how bad you are and how bad he is, but isn't Jesus and God great because God died on a cross for us? And what is happening really here is that the pastor is the sadist and the churchgoer is the masochist. And because of shame, which is you're already telling yourself that you're bad, like I don't think that the preacher is not creating the shame. The creature is doing, it's like self-harm, right? You already have the bad feeling, so you do something else to minimize the bad feeling that you can't get rid of, physical pain. But this is spiritual self-harm. But it's not self-harm, it's a sadomasochistic, non-consensual sadomasochistic relationship between the minister and the churchgoer. And people don't realize that what that is doing, it's easing their shame bizarrely. It's making them, it's giving them a reason of why they feel bad.
Temporary relief,
totally
though.
temporary. It's not, and it's not like self-harm is another thing. Hey, hot take, get myself in trouble here. I'm sorry, but self-harm can be necessary for people, especially for periods of time, because the realities of suffering in this world are fucking real. And you can't just be like, tell yourself to feel better. And so sometimes you do something to your body that causes pain, that relieves your inner pain. And again, if somebody can't relate to that at all, I don't even understand how you're a human being. Okay. I couldn't understand an experience of life where you don't at times need something like that. I'm not saying go do self-harm, but I don't like the shame associated with it personally. It can be something I realize now that my relationship to playing music in the past was definitely related to self-harm. It was about experiencing physical pain that gave me a release in my body, the way that I performed. You know, Josh knows what I'm talking about. One time I literally slammed my head into a brick wall while playing at the Comet here in Seattle. And I really hurt myself, like seriously. And I felt no pain at all at the time. I did the next day. And I mean, I still have some neck problems associated with all that stuff from back then. But anyways,
yeah, it's really this is very interesting thinking about the self-harm, thinking about like crucifixion, Jesus, thinking about shame. And then I'm just reflecting on my own life and what Jesus meant to me when I was 16. And my encounter with Christianity, church, Jesus, like it was so profoundly helpful to me, and the crucifixion and all that for me to release my shame. It didn't seem like unhealthy because I felt it's almost like that death or like that self-harm. I'm not trying to like necessarily compare the two of like crucifixion and self-harm, how we typically think of it. And it like did help me release that shame. You know,
it gives you
accepting
a specific avenue.
Yeah,
that's why it can work for a time, but it can't work long term.
Yeah, and then it just gets you, for some reason
you have to move beyond that.
Christianity and the church, they just, like, I remember having that experience at 16, and probably within 6 months I was just totally back in shame, as much if not worse than before. It's really unfortunate.
You know, as an aside, for people who have been taught that God foreordained that Jesus, the Son of God, would be crucified, I don't believe that from the text. Jesus is executed by the state because of what Jesus is saying and doing, like so many others in our history who have been executed and tortured by the state. That's the crucifixion. It's the connection with the suffering of everyone who's resisted uh you know evil in the world. And I mean real. I don't mean demonic evil. I mean structural evil. I mean governments and greedy rich people who hurt the poor and working people. But anyways, in my mind, Jesus was executed by the state because of the things he said and did, again, like so many others. It's not that remarkable what happened to Jesus. That's happened to millions of people. Like, how many people were killed in the Soviet Union? Like, how many people? I mean, we just go on, and how many people that were resisting slavery in America were executed? How many black people were lynched? Right? Like, it's like that. It's that kind of thing. But anyways, but for the people, if you're taught that Jesus was like predestined to be crucified and tortured, it is self-harm. That's what it would be. It would be God torturing God, like on purpose, which that would be self-harm. And if you think of it that way, even though nobody would say that in that kind of a church, but that's what you're saying, really. If God preordained it, then God is torturing God, which is kind of goth and punk rock, I guess, but not very helpful.
The title of one of the stories is "Bright Light of the Christian Bookstore." What makes Christian bookstores? I think they're very creepy.
Yes, this is the uncanny of the place with no shadow.
What makes them creepy?
Yeah. They're creepy because there's no shadow. In the bright light of the Christian, these Christian bookstores were popular in the 90s. They kind of got going in the 70s, into the 80s, and then in the 90s there was like, within, I don't know, 5 miles of where I am right here, there was probably 5 Christian bookstores or something. And they would sell, obviously, Bibles and like Christian books, and they're really corny for the most part, but they had a music section where there was this indie Christian hardcore punk movement happening at the time that does not exist anymore. And that's where you had to go to get these albums. And so if you got into this music scene, you could only get the music at the shows or at the Christian bookstore, because they didn't sell them generally at the warehouse or whatever. Here in Seattle, Silver Platters, like, not till later, when a label like Tooth and Nail got more distribution. But anyways, that's not till the early 2000s, late 90s. Anyways, these Christian bookstores, they're really bright, like fluorescent light, and they play like super milquetoast adult contemporary music, contemporary Christian music, which is just like Richard Marx, but the songs are, or Phil Collins, but the songs are about Jesus. And except even worse than that, musically, with the exception of a few, like someone I someday want to make a fake biopic and turn it into a horror movie. Amy Grant, who I have admiration for, actually, who is queer affirming. Amy Grant. Yeah. Good job, Amy Grant. I actually genuinely have admiration for Amy Grant. She was canceled, by the way. The evangelicals created cancel culture. Now they all complain about it. They created it. I could talk about that forever. Anyways, these Christian bookstores were, the place, like if you cursed in there, it'd be like, oh my goodness. They're just these places where it's just, it's a fake, it's put on. And what is the self without a shadow? It's not a real self. That's what's scary about it. There's a new horror movie coming out that looks terrible. It's called Smile. And the idea is like, everyone who's going to like kill somebody or die, they have the huge smile on their face. And it's like, and you've seen this in a million scary movies. Like when an evil person smiles, it's like, it's uncanny, right? Because that's not supposed to be what a smile is. That's the Christian bookstore. It's the smile. That's a horror. Yes.
Yeah, that's what it is. I was just saying, you walk into it, and it's like bright and these.
You've talked
Thomas
about wanting
Kincaid
to that you would. Oh, there you go, Thomas Kincaid. What's more horrific than
the Artists of Light, I believe, and yet there's no light to be found. It's the smile that's like creepy. Like that's not. Yeah. When I used to go into those stores, I used to feel a gurgling, a growling inside of me, especially when I was younger, I thought, I must be possessed by a demon because the demon's getting upset.
At the holiness of the Christian bookstore.
Yeah, but anyway, that I don't really want to get too into that because there's probably a lot going on there. But I think it does this. I think you're right. It's the shadow or the absence of a shadow. The if anything, there's probably the real spirit in me was like, flee, run from this.
This is another problem with, we're talking a lot more about this than I meant to, but the evangelical Christian culture. But you can apply this evangelical culture. I always found was very similar to preppy culture or bougie culture.
Okay.
They were the people that were like the preppy kids, the popular kids in high school, were just like most of the kids that went to the youth group. The difference was just like some of their behavior, but their attitudes were very similar. Not open-minded, not curious, very certain of everything, totally superficial, all this kind of stuff. They were the same. They just, one of them partied and had sex, and the other ones didn't, or they did, but they had to keep it a secret.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason, so to me, there's a mirroring in the United States of consumer culture and evangelical culture of these total binary thinking. And in evangelical culture, everything is good or bad, and there's nothing in between. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the growling in me going to the Christian bookstore is the, capitalism and Christianity, coming together.
There's the merger, of course.
And walking in and being a person, whatever, like a genuine seeking,
a curious person.
Yeah, and going in there and just being like, this is the opposite of all that, and yet it's trying to portray itself not very well in a way that's like good or something, or holy, as they probably say.
I saw somebody describe recently, I heard somebody describe evangelicals as people with no questions. And that is right. But so that part of like,
very interesting,
what's been uncanny for people, when I talk to people who were involved in any way with Christianity in the 90s, is that we do a false equation now where like, say like, where we try to compare then and now, like what would it be like if we were teenagers now? Well, we wouldn't go to church now because there was room for questions. There still was some room for questions at the time. And there's no longer any room for questions. And that's basically the difference, because it's completely bought into white nationalism and Trump, basically. And there's no more questions once you go there. Everything is good or evil. And now literally we have the language in Trump culture now has gone so far as to now you'll hear people from the pulpit equating Democrats with the demonic. And it's like, that would have been, if somebody would have said that in the 90s, we would have been like, what are you talking about? It would have just been weird. And now it's just like normal. And so it's a big change. If any, yeah. So for people who did experience some of that world, I mean, the story of the bright light of the Christian bookstore, I hope it's both a comforting and a disruptive story, as I hope everything I write is. I want both of those things. Does that work? I don't know.
Going back to what we were talking about, fear and anxiety, this is where, when religion's being used as a way to salve your anxiety in life,
yeah,
that creates a host of other problems and dilemmas.
That's when it's the opiate of the masses, like Marx said. Like that's when I mean, religion doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily that way. I mean, religion is supposed to give you a path to living a life of love and I
would say embracing the question,
resistance,
living in the question.
But also politically, to resist the forces that cause suffering in the world, to lift up the oppressed, to bring down the wealthy. That's what Jesus says explicitly.
I'm gonna shift us. I feel like we're moving too far away.
I know, we've really
Sayulita stories. So
yeah,
pulled my random question out. What piece of fiction has affected you the most, would you say?
Yes, that's the brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky, which these stories are nothing like whatsoever. And because, when you read Dostoevsky, it'll make you never want to even attempt to write anything because it's so overwhelming and so incredible. But that book it changed my life. It opened up it gave me the possibility of asking all kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like the Grand Inquisitor in there, and I resonated with Alyosha, his kind of spirituality very much. I still do. But I also know all those people. I know Ivan. I know the Dmitri. I know that. I've met those people. And I know the dad. Scarily, actually, he kind of shows up in one of these stories. Kind of the hedonistic dad. But yeah, that one. And then just like the book, The New Seeds of Contemplation by Thomas Merton, because it has a very simple and direct style that works for me. Like, and then, like everything by Murakami, literally everything. He's my favorite living author.
Where does your desire to write fiction come from?
Well, the easiest way to say it would be to travel.
Mm.
It's my form of travel now, and I mostly because I need to. Basically, I just have to. If I don't, life sucks. Basically, it's pretty simple. The funny thing is, I never completed a fictional story until I was like 41.
What do you say travel? What are you meaning by that?
When I was young, I traveled a huge amount, and a lot of it was out of my agency because of my parents. But then after high school, I literally moved city, state, country like 6 years in a row, and I ended up getting settled in Tepic, Mexico for like I think I was there for 7 years or 8 years, and I've been back in Seattle for 11 years. Like I'm going on 11 years now, and that period of my life, is over. And movies and books and music have always meant everything to me. But well, that's the other thing. Like I used to do music, right? I mean, I did music with you and a bunch of amazing other people, and music was my release. And I just reached a point in my life where I needed words for that, and music couldn't do that for me. Me playing music, I needed words and not write, but I didn't want to write songs, because I've written songs and sang them, and actually now when I think back, there was a period of time where I was listening to like tons of Bright Eyes and Bob Dylan and Neil Young, and stuff that's like that guitar wise is accessible, at least in terms of just like writing some songs with an acoustic guitar. And Josh has heard all these songs, but now if I ever listen to one of those songs again or whatever, they're story songs. They're character songs. They're not about me. They're characters. And for whatever reason, characters just come to me. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to feel the sense that these characters, they needed to be heard.
Yeah.
Terry in the Bright Light of the Christian Bookstore is a good example of that. Literally he showed up one morning in my mind and just was looking at me. And then he started to talk to me.
It's kind of, yeah, like writing is combining the, travel is where we can go into the unknown, and
yes.
And it could be scary to go somewhere unknown, or it's like facing your fear, not letting your fear keep you from like the possibilities of the unknown and difference. And then also you're saying that you don't travel in that way now because of limitations of life.
Yep.
I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've embraced like your limitation, and you're still traveling through stories and writing and
the only real
and looking at new things, unknown things.
The only to me, writing is going into the impossible. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm
Yeah.
following these characters. I don't outline a story ahead of time ever, ever. That's death of story for me. It's I'm following the characters and I don't know what's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
And it's scary. That's one thing that like writing can be absolutely terrifying. I had an experience that almost stopped me from writing ever again, where I started writing a story. It actually the story that ended up becoming the novel that I wrote, The Sky Finally. I tried to start that probably like 7 years ago or something. It's actually when you and me were in this band Casa. But that's when I started to try to write fiction. And I have this experience where a character came up and I was like, who's this character? And I experienced a fear unlike I've ever experienced before, an absolute horror, a terror inside. Like I was like, holy shit. I stopped immediately and I didn't even try to write fiction for like 2 years or more, or even longer than that, because I was so scared by
What were you scared of?
I was scared of my shadow, obviously, is what it was. And I saw a therapist that you recommended who was amazing. Saw him 5 or 6 times. He was great, very helpful. And that's where I learned about the shadow self. And showed me how you do shadow work, which I started to do. And that's when I knew writing. That was the only way. Writing and horror films was the only way that I was going to be able to grow as a person.
And again,
So really, why do I
back,
write? I do it to grow as a person. That's why.
Yeah. And again, the fear and a lot of times what we're most scared of can be what we need to move into.
Yes, this is why in my stories I always ask myself, where's the violence, where's the blood, and where's the sex? There's got to be sex and violence. Not that sex shouldn't be connected to the shadow, but sex is this visceral thing that it affects us, many of us, intensely. And a lot of us have some kinds of fears, or often people have guilt and shame associated with sex. It's just like for me, it's just like there's got to be sex and violence in a story.
How does sex play a role in these stories? Sexuality.
Sex is a part of every one of these stories. Sometimes almost a main theme of them. And speaking of, there's one story that I do want to give a trigger warning for like misogynistic language. It even hurts me to read the story. It's called High School Striptease. The story I even wavered about keeping in, but I felt like for some reasons that it needs to be in there, even though it's hurtful. Some of the things in the story, at least it's hard for me to read it, but I felt like it had to be in there. And so just like that, I do want to do a trigger warning for that for people. But some people talk like that and act like that. And I feel like when I'm writing, I have to be honest to the characters. That's why one of the most interesting things about writing is when you're discovering a character that says and does things that you hate. And then you have the question of are you going to take responsibility for being honest to that character, or are you going to be like shy away from it? And to me, if you shy away from it, you should not write or make films or music or anything if you're not willing to do that.
Yeah, and sex can play into like almost like everything we're talking about in this conversation, which is with
these are queer stories too, by the way. These are queerness is a part of all these stories as well.
The 1990s is kind of like an unnamed character.
All the stories but one.
What would the 90s manifest in a person, or like what would that character kind of
it's funny because
or like
the book the last story in the book is called New York City Y2K. It's about the last night of the 90s.
Right,
it's true.
Right. The last night of the 90s.
The 90s for me, a character, trying to think of, for me, what's the symbol of the 90s?
A character, like what makes a character, like their desires, their fears.
Oh, well, the 90s in a lot of ways are the before movies. Before sunrise, before sunset, before midnight. Ethan Hawke, right, is this guy Not so much the Reality Bites character, even though I do enjoy that movie, but his character in Before Sunrise, or both of their characters in Before Sunrise, in a lot of ways, the combination of earnestness and irony and sarcasm is really interesting to me. I never liked when the 90s went too far into sarcasm and cynicism. I never thought that was funny or cool. That's why the character in Reality Bites is a little too much.
You're like even though you're a little bit old, but you kind of have a little bit of a millennial budding inside you, perhaps.
Yes.
The buds.
And I love earnestness. I love earnestness.
Yeah.
But there is this. I am a child of the 90s and the 80s, in that time where we were taught that, like, to be colorblind, which I learned is wrong, right? Like, or that idea of the end of history, that we had kind of reached the peak in terms of like capitalism and democracy, which is not true. This idea that when I was younger that I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I was very now you'd be like, come on, you're not going to hear a millennial, not your average, typical millennial is going to be like Republicans are homophobic and misogynistic, and racist and everything. Like those. So the 90s is a different time. And so, like, that's one thing. There's not a lot about politics in these stories. Although the New York City Y2K does get into that a bit. I mean, everything is political, to be clear. But these characters they're, well, actually, wait, the Sayulita story is very much about politics. But that's the one that's set today, because you don't have a choice anymore. I mean, and back then it was like the 90s was this time of relative prosperity in the United States, obviously not for large groups of people, clearly, but we didn't have the same kind of fears in the United States, especially in a place like Seattle. It seemed like a lot of our problems were behind us. Like, I remember I was really into learning about the civil rights movement and learning about like women's liberation stuff and all that. And it felt like, yeah, we still have problems, but like there was this wrong idea that we had this idea that we had progressed further than we were, I guess. In the night, Bill Clinton, that kind of symbolizes that. Like,
it's interesting because that term, like colorblind, that was like a 90s thing, and really it's just like, it's not colorblind, it's like you're just blind if you're like that's really what was happening, is like the colorblind was just making it worse. The blindness was worse because you use a term
you're being blind to what the realities of all the racism that was and everything, sexism and homophobia, like misogyny, all of the stuff that was. I mean, think about it now. Like, gay marriage was illegal in the 90s.
It's kind of like the 90s is, in a way, it is like a teenager, like even as a society or whatever, where your naivete is about to be revealed. It's about to, even like you could say, like September 11th, the United States.
That's the end of the 90s.
Invincible, and it came crashing down, and then now white people, white society, hopefully is being confronted with their white.
And how is white society how is white society reacting to this confrontation? Literally, this is why Trump symbolizes that reaction. It's old, rich, retired people complaining when other people are actually suffering,
dying,
and thinking that they've earned it or something, to just like sit around and play golf.
Who are some of your favorite movie directors, and then after you maybe share, who would you want to direct maybe one of these, or take the idea and kind of make it their own?
Yeah, so I have thought about this a little bit just for fun. And so I'm just going to go through them, and it covers most of my favorite filmmakers. I will say the one filmmaker that I would not wouldn't work for any of these is I love Rainer Werner Fassbinder,
Huh.
and I don't see any of these working with his style. Or if he
But it
did,
could be
he
interesting.
well,
It'd make
that's
it more
right.
interesting.
That's right. I just see he's so like German and like that's just like I'm not German. Anyways, all right. So I thought, okay, so the story erotic thriller The Tumbleweed, which is set in 1994 in the San Fernando Valley. And there's some with that one, I would want it to be either probably my favorite director, which is David Lynch. I can't, it's hard to imagine him making a movie with mostly adolescents, but he could do anything. And or Pedro Almodovar, the Spanish director, actually, I think would be good. Would do something interesting with that one. And I'm a big fan of his. For Sayulita, I thought it's Paul Thomas Anderson. It's at the beach. It's like sunny. He's so good at that. And he's really good at dialogue scenes because that there's yeah. I think definitely Paul Thomas Anderson, who's whew, do I love his movies. For the Bright Light of the Christian Bookstore, I thought Jim Jarmusch
Mm.
or Gus Van Sant. He could
Mm-hmm.
bring that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think Gus Van Sant because he has that.
He knows how to
What
do
do
the
you call
Pacific
it?
Northwest. Well, that the story is set in Arizona, but it still
Also, just like
feels
weirdo,
like a
like
Seattle story.
kind
Yes.
of weirdos. Like he has a compassion and
Drugstore Cowboy,
yeah,
My
I
Own
think
Private
I like that
Idaho.
one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. In one of the stories, actually, they're these three friends on the last night of 1999. It's late at night and they're drinking and talking, and they at one point they just it's very brief, but they all pick their best movie of the 90s. And I like thinking about characters, like what are their favorite books, movies, and music. It helps me like get to know them more. And one of them says My Own Private Idaho. One of them says Magnolia,
Hmm.
and one of them says Malcolm X. Oh yeah, Spike Lee. I didn't think about Spike Lee. Spike Lee would have been fun for. I'll have to think about that. Anyways, for high school striptease, definitely Sofia Coppola. She's so good at capturing teenagers, and she'd fill it up with awesome music. And I love her movies. I love her style. She captures very humanistic, and when she does things that are funny, she always does it in a way that's like real, not like yeah, I don't know. Love her. And then for the last story, New York City Y2K, well, Robert Altman would be an obvious one because he made a movie called Gosford Park, which is one of the only movies that I've ever seen where it shows the working people as much as it shows the people that are being served. And in New York City Y2K is a story for all my industry people, everyone who's worked in restaurants and bars. The story is dedicated to you, including all the wonderful people I've worked with over the years in restaurants and bars. And this is a story for like what it's like for the workers. And yeah, and I'm really happy with that story because of how it's. I feel like it captures what it's like, and I feel kind of bad for people who have never been able to work in a restaurant or a bar.
Hmm.
It's something that it seems like everybody should get to
Mm-hmm.
experience
Yeah, like
at some point.
some countries like you got to join the military. It's like
Yeah,
kind of like everyone should have to do customer service as like a mandated being a part
and
of society.
for some reason for me specifically a restaurant that has a bar, like
Mm-hmm.
that's a big part of it. I don't know, you learn a lot about people, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the other director for New York City Y2K, Hal Ashby, who is someone that I have unbelievable reverence for. He's also The Last Detail, Coming Home. He brings this. Oh my God, his movies are so powerful. And I've talked about all of these directors on The Trace in the past. The two directors that are beloved to me that unfortunately, like genre wise, wouldn't work: John Carpenter, David Cronenberg. But you know what? I got to write a story for them someday. And then also, though, hey, Eric Stone, if you want to direct any of these, you go ahead.
What kind of person would hate Hate's a strong word.
Fundamentalists,
Hate reading this book. Yeah.
be they religious or atheist, you will not like this book. Anyone who's incurious, you will not like this book. If you are the kind of person that like doesn't like to think about politics and religion and sex, then you should not read this book. Yeah, that's it. Anybody else? I think you'll find something in there.
There's location is a definite theme of
Huge
each story.
theme.
It's
Huge.
like, I would say a unique part of the book is the location is like pronounced.
My environments affect me profoundly, and as John Mulaney says, I'm an indoorsman. But still, the way a place looks and the way the culture of a place is affects me dramatically. And I think everyone is obviously, but I'm very, very, very aware of it.
Yeah. What are some of these locations symbolize? Like there's Phoenix.
Yeah,
What do they symbolize? Seattle.
New York I can't City. Say what they symbolize, but
okay.
Yeah, New York City. Well, New York City, for example, is a place that I've never been. But it's a place that has had an enormous impact on my life because of films and artists, films that are set in New York and artists that are from New York. And New York is a place where people like James Baldwin and Hannah Arendt, two of the people I admire the most from the 20th century, both. James Baldwin's from there, from Harlem, and Hannah Arendt, when she escaped World War II, Europe, as a Jewish person, she moved to New York, and
it is kind of like a refuge for.
Which is why I kind of don't want to go to New York now, because I don't want to see fancy New York. I want to see Taxi Driver. I want the messy New York, even though I know it would be dangerous. It just seems like a boring place now. I'm not, of course not. I'm sure it's awesome, and I want to go to New York, but it's like I have a thing about this New York that existed before.
What it represents.
Yes.
It is very, it's like the most American,
the best of America to me, because it's a diverse place. It's a place for intellectuals and artists, and it was a place for working people too. And it doesn't seem like it's a place for working people anymore. And that's the part, but that's what's happening in all the big cities. So,
and interesting again, that's the last story in this collection. It's the end of the 90s. The end, and like kind of what we're talking about now, kind of like the end of,
and the end is
America, the beginning. Could whatever. I don't have a hard time talking about like America or something in a patriotic way. Not because I'm anti-America necessarily, but
in the bright light of the Christian bookstore, I describe, because I think that story. I had thought about that story being set somewhere else, but then I realized it had to be there. But there's a sentence where I say, like, Phoenix, Arizona is like a Christian bookstore. It's bright and it never changes. And that, because like in Phoenix, I've lived there before, and it's all degrees of how hot it is. That's it. It doesn't change. There's no seasons really. It's just like sunny. It's either sunny and warm or sunny and unlivably hot. And also, like a Christian bookstore, you're always in stores and in air-conditioned places, which I don't like at all personally. So it was a place, it was not a good place for me to be, even though I have wonderful friends from Phoenix and that still live in Phoenix. And it's just not good for me. I know people that it's really good for.
Phoenix for, especially people who like whatever took it over.
If you're from Seattle, Phoenix is punishing.
Yeah,
if you like the
colonizers, whatever, who came, like it's unlivable for them.
Not until air conditioning. Exactly.
Not till air conditioning. And to say in the Christian bookstore is like, it's bright, and it's like, but really it's like an unlivable, sustainable thing, and you will die.
And they don't even exist anymore. They don't exist. Or barely.
Yeah.
And of course, Seattle is in this multiple stories. Seattle is my home, all caps. even though there are so many things that I hate about this place, but they're all related to the economics of Seattle and a false idea of Seattle being this super progressive place when we are totally regressive economically. And we have people living outside just because of greed and stupidity.
It's a little bit 90s still.
I like the 90s Seattle much more than I like.
No, I'm saying
Seattle.
now it's there's this facade of progress, being
like Bill
progressive.
Clinton. Yeah. Well, that's we Seattle's like that. It's always we always elect a Democrat for mayor or whatever, and it's like, but it's like what rhinos are Republicans in name only. Here in Seattle, we have Democrats that are in name only.
Yeah. Is there a relation to hope in this book?
There is a relation.
I guess we have to maybe define what hope is, because that's a pretty loaded word.
And I've talked about this many times on the Trace in the past. I get my definition of hope from my favorite philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard. By the way, if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to the Trace, I interviewed Claire Carlyle, who wrote a biography. It's one of the best biographies I've ever read of Kierkegaard, and I got to interview her. That book is called The Philosopher of the Heart. I recommend that book immensely if you have any interest in philosophy, people. But she is one of the best interviews I ever was able to do, not because of me, because she is unbelievably brilliant. Wow. I'm just amazed by Claire Carlyle. I wish I was friends with her in real life. So Kierkegaard.
You want to be seen by her? Sorry.
I did get to be seen by her.
I know. But Friends is an ongoing mutual agreement of being seen.
Exactly. Yeah. She's in London. And anyways, Kierkegaard talks about hope, fear, and despair as being in relation to each other, which I agree with this 100%. Hope is the expectant relation to the possible good. Fear is the expectant relation to the possible bad. And despair, which Kierkegaard calls the sickness unto death, despair is nothing is possible. I hate art, stories, and movies that have that sense of nothing is possible. There's more of these movies than you would think. I don't want to name them because I don't want to complain about things that I don't like as much anymore publicly. So I'm not going to name them, but it's one of the things I hate the most. I mean, the things I don't want in a movie, I don't want to know what's going to happen. I don't want that feeling of formula or story. But I also don't want that feeling of like everything is fucked, period. That's it. Like, or like, might as well just die. Why even be here? Like, not that I don't know that feeling on occasion, but all the best horror movies, this is my favorite kind of movie. The best ones in my mind are ones where people are trying to survive. I've written about this extensively, and best example being the ending of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or the ending of Alien, or the ending of Halloween, where you have specifically women resisting death to an exceptional degree that, if you think at all about it, is a radical fucking validation and affirmation of life. And I'm about that, as long as we're honest about life. Because if life is a place where those things don't happen, that's not reality. Because we are in a world where people suffer all the time because of other people. And there are monsters. They're real. They're called human beings, and they're usually men. Anyways, hope believes that something good is possible. Something good is coming. Hope is different than desire. Desire has a specific object. I want this to happen. Hope is not supposed to be a synonym with desire. Hope is supposed to be its own word. And hope means that something good is coming. I don't know what it is. What could it be? That's exciting. And so hope, in my view, with Kierkegaard and with Jacques Derrida, is that hope is related to the impossible, something that you can't predict, that you can't make happen. Whereas you can work on desire. You can just, if you want something, you can work to get it. If it's possible, I can work to make money to like buy a Blu-ray player or whatever, right? The hope is different than that. It functions in a different place. And it's very much a part of these stories. Goes back to event.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, my, like, helping put this out, I guess my wish would be that this book, is finds itself, and someone finds that, and they maybe get this inside of themselves of reading something, of having an event, maybe not through reading it, but just like learning how to recognize it, learning how to, that change is possible, that possibilities are always there. So yeah.
Whenever I talk to somebody about who reads it, any of the stories, what I want to know is how it made them think about things from their lives. That's what I'm interested in. That's I don't really, somebody's like, I liked your book or what. It's like, that's great or whatever. But what gives me fulfillment is when somebody can relate it to their own experience, or to a friend of theirs, or like, oh, I knew that this person is just like that, or I had a friend like, like that's stuff I like to hear. So yeah, that hopefully it would make a person think about the best art. It makes you, it takes you back to things that you've experienced, and the best of the best will make you think of it in a new way. That's the best of the best. That's the best art can do, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I know when I read them, I get that feeling of change or possibility, and it's a very unique kind of thing that art can do, and I appreciate it. How has writing it affected you or changed you, writing these stories, completing them?
It's made me more of an open person, less judgmental, a little more free, a little more liberated. Yeah.
I think we have a couple more questions. So, what does youth mean to you?
Possibility, loneliness, moving from ecstasy to terror, falling in love in all the scariest ways, not having any money, eating bad food, eating fast food, going to the video store. That's what it means to me. That unfortunately the kids don't get that now.
Spending 2 hours in a video store.
Hell yes. Shout out to Scarecrow Video here in Seattle.
Anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Please buy the book. And if you're in Seattle or around here, come on out. Thursday, October 13th, 7 p.m., Hazelwood. I might spin a few records later in the evening as well. And if
don't just buy it, read it.
Yeah. And if you read it, and you want to talk about any of it, I'm glad to. If you want to reach out or whatever. And yeah, hopefully don't think too much. If you're a friend of mine or whatever, don't think too much about me. Try and forget that I wrote it for the best possible experience, I would say. What I don't want is for people that I know to be like wondering the whole time what parts are, if there are parts that I, are real or whatever actually happened. That's the one thing that I don't like. And please don't ask me if any of it, actually happened. I will not answer your question. It's all the same to me in writing, where David Lynch says that when you're writing or doing art or getting ideas, he says some things come from your experience, but other things come out of the ether. And functionally, there's no difference between the two. There's no difference when you're writing between something that actually happened to you or whatever, or somebody else, and what came out of pure imagination. No difference. It's exact same thing. It doesn't matter.
All right. October 13th, Thursday, 7 p.m., Hazelwood. Join us for the release party.
Leftofage.com, thetracepodcast.com. And if you want to order directly, you can email me at willthefire@gmail.com. Books $20.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for having me, Trace Podcast.
Thank you for doing this, Josh. Love you.
Love you.